Hill runs away with DipCon. Virtual leagues run game days, and Shelden runs for Senate. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, May 2022. For our feature story, learning the game of diplomacy is not an easy task. Negotiation skills and strategic timing are difficult aspects of the game to master, for example, but the basic tactics of the game are easier to pick up, right? Maybe not. There is a lot of nuance to moving the units around the board, so later in the program, a panel of diplomacy experts will help you utilize available tactical tricks to overcome your opposition on your next board. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. For our top story, the 2022 North American Diplomacy Championships, what we call DipCon, was held the last weekend of April in conjunction with the Whipping Tournament in San Jose, California. Tanya Gill of Ontario took first place, edging out multiple world title holder Andrew Goff from Australia. New Jersey's Noam Brown came in third. This 19-board, 4-round event was run by outgoing DipCon champ Adam Silverman, along with assistance from Siobhan Nolan, the current president of the North American Diplomacy Federation. You can watch full coverage of this event, including the all-important round 4 of the tourney, which featured a Gill-Goff seesaw over the lead, on the Diplomacy Broadcast Network YouTube or Twitch channels. With DipCon in the books, the face-to-face diplomacy circuit in North America now enters its summertime stretch with events scheduled every month. The 36th annual DixieCon will take place May 27 through 29 in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Then comes the Regatta in Denver, Colorado, scheduled for June 17 through 19. The rescheduled Cascadia in Surrey, British Columbia on July 9th and 10th, and then the Boston Massacre August 12th through 14th. And that doesn't even count the ones coming up in September, October, and November. This year's circuit is chock full of opportunities to play the game and to meet other diplomacy players. So check out the VWDC and NADF Discord servers for more information, or click the links below. For a little more about Denver's upcoming regatta, let's cut to my discussion with Manus Hand and Gabe Rash. Well, hey guys, and welcome to Deadline.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Manus, let's start with you. Tell us who you are, where you are, what you do, and how you got into diplomacy, if you would.
Okay. Well, I am Manus Hand. I'm here in Denver, and one of the guys running the Armada, the Denver and Rocky Mountain area diplomacy.
It's the Association of Rocky Mountain Area Diplomacy Adversaries.
Yep. And
you named it.
I did name it. Way back in the 90s, I named it. So my history in the hobby goes back that far. It's now, 30 years, I guess, since I created the diplomatic pouch when I first discovered play-by-email diplomacy, having learned the game like most of us back in junior high and high school. So I was, for the late 80s up to the early 2000s, just 24/7 diplomacy man. Took some time off after that. We're trying to get the scene going again here in Denver. And then, of course, COVID delayed us a little bit, but here we are. We're back. We're going to try to be back with a vengeance.
All right. Thanks. How about you, Gabe?
And I'm Gabe Rax. I'm near Denver in Louisville, Colorado. And I've been, like Manus, I've been playing diplomacy since high school, way back in the late 80s. Played a lot online, particularly in the early 2000s on the Ken Lowe Judges and UKDP. Sporting today an official Armada power hat that we try to use. This one features President Loubet of France to distinguish the powers when we select them for our games. And I'll just launch in that we're here to announce Armada's Regatta 2022 that will be held June 17th to 19th 4 rounds starting 7 p.m. on Friday, June 17th. And Manus is in our beautiful venue, which is the Doubletree Hotel in the Denver Tech Center. You want to be our spokesmodel there for the venue, Manus? I hear there's
I
a
will.
bar.
There is a bar. It's closed right now, but don't worry, I'll wait around for it to open.
There's no doubt of that.
After the broadcast, I'm sure. But yep, there's a bar right near our playing area. In fact, I'm standing where we're going to be playing, and we have plenty of space. We're going to share the space with any other people that may want to use it on a Saturday afternoon, but that's okay. We'll ask them to join the games and hopefully get some more victims for you.
How many rounds are you going to play?
We have 4 planned: 1 Friday night, 2 on Saturday, and 1 Sunday morning before awards.
And best 3 will count.
Yes, best 3 counts.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How does one find out more information about this or register?
I just got done speaking with the sales lady here at the hotel. She said she will have a link for us to get to you tomorrow. So you can use the discounted rate here if you stay at the hotel, which I definitely recommend. They're blocking off a bunch of rooms for us, so we'll have that. Other than that, emailing me might be the fastest way to get quick answers to whatever your questions are. You can do that at Manus, MANUS, at manushand.com, MANUSHAND. That works. Oh, the other one that works is Diplom, DIPLOM, at diplomat, manushand.com. Also works. So diplomat, manushand.com. And Gabe, you can give your own contact too. We want to get back to you as fast as we can.
That's right. Best place to reach me is Gabe, Gabe, at racz.org.
All right, guys, that's great. I do want to just end by saying that I myself went to Regatta in 2001 and 2003, enjoyed the experience very much, and I'm looking forward to you all getting back to being one of the stops on the Grand Prix Tour.
Yep, we're looking forward to it as well. Maybe we'll get back in the business of hosting the big events like World DipCon and DipCon, which we did back in those years that you mentioned. A lot of people remember the reducing victory center conditions so that you eventually would win the game with fewer than 18 was one of the rules we had back in the day for one of those events. Wanted to assure people that hated that it's long gone, and we're more of a draw-based system, a lot like David has there.
Yes.
In Chapel Hill.
I also hated that scoring system. So,
well, we're definitely not going to start a scoring system debate because we don't have time for that. But I will say, regardless of scoring system, if anyone out there can go to this tournament in June, please do it. We need to support all of our tournaments and support the development of our North American Grand Prix back to the way it was in the old days.
And thank you, David.
You're here. Thank you.
Thanks to you guys for being on the show. One way that many diplomacy fans play our game is on web platforms such as Web Diplomacy. But these things do not run themselves. Hobbyists can and do step up to volunteer their time to assist in both technical and non-technical roles. The fine folks at WebDip have announced their desire to recruit several more moderators to join their team, with assistance needed in a variety of areas. If you watched last month's deadline, you saw our featured interviewee, Tanya Gill, encourage everyone to get off their behinds and pitch in to support the hobby. If you are on WebDip, here's an excellent way to heed her call to action. You can email their mod team at webdipmod@gmail.com, or you can find the relevant posts in the Web Diplomacy forum. You know what you need in order to get a face-to-face pickup game of diplomacy going in your local area? Why not ask Ben Kelman, who just made it happen in the Detroit, Michigan area on May 7th. Russ Dennis joined in, along with Jeremiah Lee, Dan Faust, Greg Dunow, old school postal and face-to-face player Herb Barents, and the new to the game John Breams, who topped the board anyway, as an 11 center Germany. The best way to grow our hobby is for you, yourself, to ask someone to play with you. You can use the face-to-face registry and other resources available at various websites, including the North American Diplomacy Federation, and of course you can reach out to other organizers to find out how they did it. Tag, you're it. Now let's take a trip around the various websites and YouTube channels for the content providers we call the DBN Media Partners. The Diplomats YouTube channel has been posting video after video recently as the coverage of the Nexus Season 7 main event final marches on. This online tournament final featured players well known in multiple formats, including Jordan Connors, Greg Matthews, Ed Sullivan, Matthew Krill, Tarsier, John Anderson, and Karthik Conniff. Breaking news, as of the date of the recording of this broadcast, this game has finished, with Ed Sullivan besting Greg Matthews for the title. Florida Man has also released a number of new videos recently on his YouTube channel, including episodes about the AIR Alliance, the Hedgehog opening, and if you can believe it, one on the Yorkshire Pudding opening, for Pete's sake. There are links to all of the media partners at the NADF.org, and there are links to the ones I mentioned below in the show notes. By the time you see this broadcast, the May edition of the Tour of Britain, a league for virtual face-to-face play run by Gary Sterling, will have already occurred. You will be able to catch coverage of those games, though, as well as information about how to join in the next Tour of Britain game day by watching the upcoming edition of DBN's League Night broadcast, scheduled for May 21st at 8:30 Eastern Time, right here on this same YouTube channel. Know what else will be covered that day? 3 rounds of Virtual Diplomacy League play, which will have staggered start times to allow folk from around the world to get in on this exciting way to play our game. You can find out more information on how to play in the VDL that day by joining the VWDC Discord server and then navigating your way to the VDL space. It's not too late to make a big splash in the 2022 VDL season. Come on in. The water is fine. Peter McNamara just won another event. This time, the face-to-face 2022 PoppyCon in Melbourne, Australia. Peter edged last year's winner Jamal Blakarli, who soloed his first board but then could not keep up his momentum in the next 2 rounds of the 3-round event. Andrew Goff was the tournament director, with Melissa Call as the venue hostess. Amby, who you probably saw in the panel discussion section of last month's deadline, was on hand for PoppyCon not only to play, but also to report on the event for he and Kaner's Diplomacy Games podcast. A link to his audio coverage of the event can be found below in the show notes. And now it's time for a segment we call My Favorite Things. We'll interview a diplomacy player about that person's diplomacy journey, and then talk about something of particular interest to that hobbyist, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we talked to Vermonter Brian Shelden about his long and colorful career in diplomacy, and then about his short but likely colorful foray into the career of real-world politics as he runs for the Vermont State Senate. Brian Shelden, welcome to Deadline.
David, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Let's start off by you telling us a little about your diplomacy journey, because you have lived in a lot of places and have basically played diplomacy in most of them. So tell us about that.
I have. I was introduced to diplomacy at Cornell as an undergrad. My buddy John Wolf organized games in high school, and then when he came to Cornell, he tried to organize a game or two among the track team there at Cornell, and I really enjoyed it. John graduated and moved away, and eventually I also graduated and ended up in New York City. I was young and I was looking for a hobby, so 2 things I looked at is I took some dance lessons at a studio in Chelsea called Stepping Out Studios, and also I joined a Yahoo group called NYC Diplomacy, looking for folks to play another game of diplomacy. So one day a gentleman posted, hey, they have these things called tournaments for diplomacy. There's one in Charlottesville. We're New Yorkers. We don't have cars. Let's all rent a car and we'll go down there and we'll go down there and play. So I was like, I have a car. So I volunteered my car. He gave me his work number. And he said, I work evenings, so call me at work. So I try to get this guy at work, and they pick up the phone, Stepping Out Studios. Can I help you? So the rest was history. So that was Chris Martin, obviously. And Conrad Woodring was in high school at the time and took the train out from Long Island and slept on Chris's armchair. We drove down to PresCon in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I was hooked. Yeah, I love the game. I love the intensity of it. And I love the people. So from there, I sort of appointed myself in charge of organizing games in New York, and I went to every tournament I could find. So one of the reasons was at the time there was this thing called the North American Grand Prix. I was never going to win the Grand Prix, but I played so much the scores were adding up. So I was meeting lots of fun people, learning more about the game. And back then I was still getting better at the game myself. So, since then, yes, I've lived in a lot of places, lived in Chicago, lived in Austin, Texas, lived in Australia. So I've lost counts of the number of games that I've played and the tournaments I've played in. So played tournaments and games on 3 continents, 6 countries, and God knows how many states. So, been playing a lot and loving every minute of it.
And I'm pretty sure I was probably at that PresCon where you came down there with Chris and Graham, because I went to most of them. So
yes.
I bet you that's where we met. Well,
I'm sure. Yeah.
What about the game diplomacy keeps you coming back?
For definitely the people. I often paraphrase Antti Bartoloni's quote in the Washington Post before the DC WDC. This is before my time, but where diplomacy is a game where you trust your competitors with the cash you need to pay off your mortgage, but not to give you support into Belgium. Tournament diplomacy, which is my favorite way to play diplomacy. It's a very stressful way to spend an afternoon. The very intense negotiations, the trust in your friends waxing and waning, and the problem solving. All that under intense time pressure. Not to compare what we do to what our servicemen are doing, but that sort of time spent in a foxhole, that's how you generate friendships that can't be beat. And, that's why some of my best friends all around the world are diplomacy players.
Well, speaking of seeking out stressful situations, you are right now in the midst of campaigning in your party's primary for a seat in the Vermont State Senate. Why did you enter the political arena?
Well, a lot of the things that I do are very self-centered things. Diplomacy is still a game where your score matters. I do triathlons, which is an individual sport. I was never fortunate enough to have kids of my own, and I've run a business where I try to live below my means so that I don't have to take every project that's given to me. So I always felt like I wanted to give back to my community. Because I was given a lot of advantages in life, and I feel like I should use my privilege to help make the lives of the people around make their lives better. Now, when I was working 80 hours a week, on Wall Street, or training for an Ironman, which was 30 hours of itself plus working 40, I just wasn't a priority. So on and off when I had the time, I was getting more and more involved with local ballot issues and local candidates. And as I did, I started to wonder if maybe I had some of the skills that could be useful. I'm not an attorney, which is the stereotypical way to get into politics like you, David. But I was wondering if some of the skills that I had would be transferable. So the thing that got me to pull the trigger and decide to run for myself was 2016. I didn't have time to give back during that cycle, and we all know what happened there. That was a very close election, and everyone has their favorite reason why Secretary Clinton lost. Mine, based on what little work in politics I did, was turnout in Wayne County, Michigan. Didn't they have 10 more people to knock on doors there? So I feel oftentimes when when nobody steps up to do something, I'm like, you know what? Why not me? Chris, some of you know Chris Glassburn. He's a political operative in Ohio, and also he's a city councilman in a suburb of Cleveland. And further, he's a frequent player at Weasel Moot, our big tournament in Chicago every year, which at the time I was organizing. As you know, and I mentioned to Chris that I was thinking of running in 2020. So he offered me a job and a mentorship at the Ohio Democratic Party. So I agreed to volunteer, and he agreed to point me at the task most relevant for a small town candidate. So, in 2018, I left my job in Chicago, worked for the Ohio Democratic Party, and after that, I moved home to Vermont with the idea of running for Vermont State Representative in 2020. So, moral of the story is I lost the primary to my now friend Tanya Vyhovsky by just 96 votes. So. Yeah, here we are in 2020. The redistricting has happened. Tanya is running for Senate as well, but she's in a Senate seat next door. So when they redrew the Senate maps, this Senate meet doesn't have an incumbent. However, my House seat does, and it was someone who, after I lost the primary, I helped her get elected and flip that seat. So I think everyone would agree with me that you shouldn't stab your allies, right?
Well, if you say so. That's not really how I operate, but if you say so. Let me ask you this. Tell us a little bit about the district that you're seeking to represent, maybe in the top one or two campaign issues for you.
Sure. The new district is composed of 4 towns. It's Milton, Fairfax, Westford, and part of my hometown of Essex. We have 2 of the largest towns in Vermont, in Essex and Milton, and one of the things that I like about this district is it's kind of the industrial base of Vermont. We have we either have in the district or the residents of the district are employees of places like Global Foundries, which is the largest chip manufacturer in Vermont. We have Husky Injection Molding in Milton. We have Green Mountain Coffee. We have here in Essex, just around the corner, we have Blodgett Ovens, which make many of the ovens used at your local Kentucky Fried Chicken. One of the challenges, one of the things that I do as a volunteer is I'm the chair of the Town of Essex Economic Development Commission. So I hear from a lot of businesses who are trying to hire and bring people to Vermont or bring people to Chittenden County, which is the county that we're in here. And one of the things we keep hearing is there are lots of good jobs, but there isn't any place for folks to live. We need to build more housing, and I think that's a national problem. If we have more housing, then there'll be more affordable housing, and that drives. I want to make that a focus of my campaign.
Well, I just the last week finished a leadership forum in Western North Carolina about affordable housing. It is definitely a nationwide problem. Let's pivot back to diplomacy just for a minute. I know that you're new to the political world, but do you think your skills as a diplomacy player will be of value to you?
I definitely do. Diplomacy is definitely good practice for politics. First and foremost, diplomacy isn't about wooden blocks, and it's not about diplomacy is about people. You have to listen to people, and when you listen to them, you have to understand where they're coming from. And one of the big life lessons I learned from my time in diplomacy is, maybe their plan is better than yours. So, the way I play diplomacy is like I listen, I make my pitch, and compromise and make sure that it's a good pitch for everybody. That is, to me, a kind of a campaign skill, as well as a skill that diplomacy teaches you that I think will make me a good senator right away. And that's coalition building. What we say in diplomacy is make sure you talk to all 6 players every turn. That's also true. It's also true in a legislative body. If you just ignore people, if you just ignore some people that disagree with you all the time, it's going to be harder to get things done. Never does you any good to ignore people, even if you're fighting with them. So, last, I think if you've decided on a course of action, you need a team. You need allies. in diplomacy, I would say if there's no point in deciding you need to get the Scandinavian dots if you don't have friends to go there with you. So I think that's also going to be true in the Vermont Senate.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, you mentioned that when you were a Windy City Weasel, you helped put on the Weasel Moot, the tournament. And in various places you've been, you have decided to give back to the diplomacy hobby. How important do you think that service to the hobby aspect is?
Definitely. I mean, I feel like one of the lots of things don't happen unless people help out, right? So it was important to me, having enjoyed all of these tournaments put on by volunteers, in Canada, in Australia, in North Carolina. None of this stuff happens without the dedication of hardworking volunteers. So at first, it was like the least I can do is help out. I mean, similarly, you're talking about how that would apply to politics. That's exactly what building a campaign is. You have to find it. And I say this on my to my campaign team all the time. The same thing I said as the leader of the Chicago diplomacy hobby is that look, this is the volunteer organization. So let me know how you can help out. And you give people tasks that they enjoy. And that help the mission, but you don't really get it. You don't really get to tell anybody what to do. So that's a lot like you run tournaments, David, too. So that it's a volunteer organization. So any help that is given is appreciated. So I was happy to both give that appreciation and be appreciated for helping out.
Well, that's great, and thank you, Brian, for volunteering to be on my program today. And good luck to you in the election.
Thank you. And I'm sorry that I might be a little bit busy this summer to come down to North Carolina and play.
That's all right. It gives other people a chance. So
Well,
thanks for that.
I was never really a threat to win your tournament, David, but I did enjoy my time there. I'm looking forward to getting back.
Sounds good. See you, Brian. And now for this month's panel discussion. You do know how to push the pieces in diplomacy, right? These three guys do. And they're here to give you their insights on tactical tricks to try in your next diplomacy match. First up, we have the runner-up from the Nexus Season 6 Press Tournament Final and one of the organizers of this year's Cascadia Tournament in the Vancouver area. It's Riaz Varani. And then Nicolas Sauge of Montreal, who has won World DipCon, the Euro DipCon, and the Virtual Diplomacy Championship. And finally, David Miller from Maryland, winner of the last two face-to-face DixieCon tournaments. So everybody, welcome to Deadline.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
David, let me start with you here. Tell us how you got into diplomacy and then a little bit about yourself outside of the hobby.
My name's David. I'm an engineer and a triathlete and big adventure explorer, always going on bike trips around. I actually got into diplomacy through Chris Martin, who was on the University of Maryland triathlon team with me, and it only took him about 3 or 4 years to convince me to come try one of these diplomacy games, and then I've been hooked ever since. So you can all blame Chris when I'm stabbing you on the next board.
Well, my theory is to blame Chris for most things most of the time.
It's a good theory.
Yeah. Nicolas, same question to you. Occupation and diplomacy origin story.
So I'm an economics professor at the business school of the University of Montreal. So I teach economics and game theory. And I've been playing diplomacy for a while now. So I played a bit when I was a college student, and then I started again when I was in Belgium in 2001. I started playing online, and then I got the face-to-face virus, and since then I've been trying to play when I could. So,
well, that virus is a good thing to catch, actually. So over to you, Riaz. To what do we owe the pleasure of your company in the diplomacy hobby?
Well, I could tell you I'm a real estate developer as well. I started out in university, like David did, playing mostly email. And then I got an opportunity to play a couple of face-to-face tournaments and some house games on the West Coast here. and I really enjoyed it. And after that, my focus ended up being more on that side. And after a little bit of time away, got back into it, and I'm really enjoying face-to-face again.
Well, we're enjoying having you in face-to-face. So let me stay with you, Riaz. If you were trying to help a newer player of diplomacy get better at the tactical aspect of the game, what would be your first suggestion?
My first suggestion would be to play a lot of gunboat diplomacy, and specifically using things like sandboxing that's there in Backstabber, for example. Because if you can put together a couple of guesses of what the person you're attacking or defending against is going to do, you can start plugging orders in, and not only to go with just supports, but also to try to actively cut other people's supports and see what potentially could happen with that.
Let me ask the same question to you, Nikolai. If you're helping someone, get past just the hold and support type orders, what's your best advice starting out of the gate?
I think Riaz was right. I think speedboat is even better than gunboat because I think you make more mistakes playing speedboat, so you see a bit more where you are. And I think also playing defense is very important. So very often people get discouraged when they get attacked early. But I think that's one of the best ways to learn tactics, to just keep fighting for as long as you can, even if you know it's getting nowhere. I think that's the best way to learn tactics, because every move counts, and every move can be the difference between surviving and dying. So many people get discouraged, but I think for a long time, I was playing like one tournament or two tournaments a year. So every game counted. And I think just playing to the end and fighting to the end helped me improve my tactics.
David, let me go over to you and tell us about any sort of tactical trick of the trade that has not yet been mentioned by these other two guys.
I think everything that's been mentioned is really important, especially that playing defense. I've learned a lot playing defense, but something that sometimes I wish newer players would do more is ask the other players at your table. Someone makes a really good move on you, ask them, maybe after the game to explain it to you. I've learned countless things from other players. I know in particular at a DixieCon once, Doug Moore explained to me all of the ins and outs of the Munich stalemate line because he had just kicked my butt across it. So, as with all things diplomacy, go talk to the other players. That's it is moving blocks around, but really it's a game of other people, and you can learn from them as well as play against them.
That's fair. Let me follow up with you, David, on another subject. How important do you think this tactical side of the game is we're talking about now in relation to the strategic side of the game when you're trying to decide about making or breaking board relationships, and then the negotiation side of the game, the negotiation ability? How important do you think the tactical side is?
I actually think most of the time the tactical side is the least important part of the game, except in certain situations. So the best tactical move is the one you don't have to make because you've convinced someone to work with you, or you don't need to make a tactical move. So for most of my games, I'd say 80% of the game, I am of course making good tactical moves, but my success doesn't hinge upon it. It's more those relationships, that strategic dynamic. When it is most important is when you're defending, let's say you're a Turkey or in England, you're getting jumped on at the beginning of the game. If you don't have good tactics, you're done. And also at the end of the game, when the stalemate lines and pushing for a solo comes into play, sometimes you get to a point where the tactics are all that matters because negotiation has ended. So I think those situations, it's extremely important. But in other parts of the game, I think maybe overemphasized by some players compared to the strategic and the negotiation phases.
Okay. Riaz, is there any particular move that you can recall a player making against you in a game that really changed the course of the battle between the two of you?
Absolutely, David. And it was actually a game that you were in as well. It was a silent but deadly game. And it was one where I was playing with Ali. And he was Italy and I was Austria, and we were just rolling the board. We were doing a phenomenal job, and all of a sudden I started overstretching myself, and he took advantage at exactly the right time, and it just completely changed the game because I had my focus in a complete other direction, in a spot I probably shouldn't have gone to, but he took advantage of my greed and really changed the game around. And him doing that in the Silent But Deadly tournament actually led to him winning that tournament. And it was a fantastic move. I don't know if you recall it or not, but he just made the right move into Tyrolia at exactly the right time.
Ali Adib is a very insightful player, and he's actually going to be interviewed in next month's edition of Deadline News. So thank you for that. Thank you for that segue. Nicola, let's talk to you for just a minute. Analyzing the board to produce the right tactical approach can be hard to do in face-to-face or virtual face-to-face because of the time limits involved. How do you suggest that a player allocate their time as between formulating their tactical moves or negotiating with the other players, realizing we've got limited time to do both?
So I think, everybody has been given the advice that when the year starts, you should write all your units on your sheet of paper. I think you should also, and that's what I do, you should also have a set of moves, either written down or in your head, like gunboat style. Everybody plays gunboat to some extent, so they have a read of the board coming from gunboat. And so you should make this analysis and have a kind of a read of the board and what you want to do, what you think can be done, and then go talk to players. And because first, you're not going to be kind of influenced by other players that are going to completely forget about mentioning a few important things. And also, if you come to the negotiation table with ideas about what the tactics look like, I think your negotiation position is much better. And maybe you won't need these tactics anymore because you're going to convince the other guy that you're a good you're a good partner, or you thought about the tactics, and also is not going to BS you into a position where he can stab you later. Well, if you immediately after the adjudication go to people without thinking about the moves, sometimes they are just going to tell you things that are not to your advantage, or tell you a set of moves that is not to your advantage. And maybe 2 minutes later you think about them, but you have already agreed, and it's kind of awkward. So I think people should really take some time after every adjudication to think about what moves they want to do and what the read of the board is, and then go negotiate. Because I think tactics is not just about writing orders, but it's also giving you a negotiation power because you know what you're talking about. So I think that people at least should take 1 or 2 minutes after every adjudication to talk about to think about the board, and not be influenced by players that know that they will be much better off if they can talk to them without them thinking.
It's good advice. Let me stay with you, Nicola. There are some commentators on DBN, for example, who really dislike self-standoffs. Are you one of those people?
I've been told when I was young that, there are the good self-bounces or self-standoff and the bad self-standoffs. And, if you're a good player, you know which one is one. I would say that if you are in a low-intensity fight, you have an ally and things are going well, then I think usually you don't need all your units to be 100% efficient. And so a standoff can be a way to go. But if you're on a high-intensity fight, usually you have better things to do than a self-bounce. And also you should always consider what is the worst case scenario if the other guy believes that you're going to do that, because this can really lead to catastrophes.
David, when deciding which guess to make in a tactical situation, there's an old adage in diplomacy that if it's a spring turn, you guess for position. And if it's a fall turn, you guess for a supply center. Agree or disagree?
I maybe throw the debate on its head. In spring, I move for position, and in fall, I move for more position. It's a game of position. A supply center that you can't hold, or a supply center that puts you out of position, can sometimes be worse than not having that supply center. I see a lot of players who will just go grab an open supply center in the fall without thinking of the consequences kind of like Nicolas said of, what is the worst case scenario if you self bounce? But what is the worst case scenario if I snag this supply center and don't have a good position? So I, at all times, am thinking about position, tactically, strategically, and for negotiations. I'd like to emphasize, when you are in a good position, it makes your negotiations so much easier, because you're negotiating from that position of strength. Tactical options are open to you. Whereas if you're just looking at supply centers, you tend to lose some of that negotiating power.
That's fair. Riaz, talk to us about the tactical advantages or disadvantages of convoys, depending on location or situation.
Sure. Well, I love convoys, so I could go on quite a bit for the advantages. So let me start with a disadvantage, and that could potentially be the efficiency of your units. For example, we see quite often a force center Italy trying to convoy to Syria. Now, it's a great move and it works, but if you're using 3 of your 4 units to convoy over to Syria, and all of a sudden leaving yourself exposed to an Austria where you pretty much have almost nothing in your homeland, I think it really benefits your neighbors more than it potentially benefits you. I mean, if I'm Austria and Italy tells me that, hey, you know what, I'm just going to move my armies over to Turkey, do you have a problem with that? I'd be willing to sign off on that right away. I'd be really happy with that. But on the flip side, convoys can get you somewhere really fast. Additionally, it can get you into key spots. There are quite a few nations where if you get an army into one of their soft spots, like for example anywhere on the English Isles, or places like Livonia, places like Albania, Syria's one as well sometimes. It can really speed up the demise of another player. I think we can all say that we've been in a situation as France where we took Liverpool with a fleet, and now it takes us forever to get into England because we don't have the army there, and England can defend themselves for a long period of time. So getting that army into the right spot can be very, very beneficial, but sometimes risky.
Okay, makes sense. Well, let's go to the final thoughts section of this panel discussion. Riaz, I'm going to start with you. Final thoughts about tactical tricks.
Final thoughts is just keep developing your tactics, play lots, make yourself really hard to kill, because people will remember that, and the next time they'll hesitate to attack you.
Fair. All right, David, same question to you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and always just tactics are important. They're not the end all be all. Work on them. When you lose a tactical situation in a game, especially a face-to-face game, go hang out with that person, figure out why you lost. Don't make that same mistake again. But also don't forget that this game is not just about tactics, about strategy. It's about negotiation. And remember how you need to weave those tactics into that. You don't always have to take the best tactical move. Sometimes it's worth leaving a tactical move on the table if it'll serve some other purpose for you in the game.
Got it. Nicolas, take us home here.
Yeah, I agree that tactics are not everything, but sometimes they make you lose a game. So in particular, 2 things we didn't mention were retreats. You have to be very careful about retreats because if someone retreats in one of your supply center or behind your line, it can be a move that loses the game. Another thing that's important is pift units. So both defensively and offensively, if one unit gets disbanded, it can be game changing. And last thing, I would say that maybe tactics are not that important, but diplomacy is a game of small margins, and maybe tactics is the dimension that is the easiest to improve, because charms and charisma. After years of experience, I can tell you can work on them, but it's easier to improve your tactics. If you don't have it, charisma, you don't have it.
Yeah, let's hope our audience takes that advice to heart. You may not be able to make yourself more likable, but you can make yourself a better tactician. Guys, thanks so much for being on Deadline.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news or ideas for features, feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. For our other broadcast offerings, visit our website at diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.